Dear friends, hi everybody, and welcome to the last and arguably perhaps the most significant part of our today conference, then books from the Cold War to the present. Will be the screening of Anna Narinskaya's film, Anna Narinskaya's and Anton Zhelnov's film about the legendary Ardis Publishers. This event, as the conference itself, is sponsored and hosted by the CUNY Academy for the Humanities and Sciences. Sarah, thank you so much again for these unforgettable 2 days here at CUNY. And it's also co-hosted by Tammy's Data Project for the study of banned books from the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. It is my pleasure to repeatedly introduce Anna Narinskaya, who is a journalist, curator, documentary filmmaker, and a playwright. She's contributed in the past to Russia's most influential media since the late 90s. Notably, she was a correspondent for Confront, covering cultural and social issues, as well as literary affairs. After Russia's annexation of Crimea and state censorship intensified, Narinskaya moved to fully independent media such as Novaya Gazeta and started curating exhibitions. Her best-known projects include 200 Hits a Minute, Typewriter and Consciousness of the 20th Century, Last Address, commemorating repressions in today's Russia, Find the Jew, Soviet Jews as a social and cultural phenomenon, etc., etc. More recently, she curated the Museum of Joseph Brodsky in St. Petersburg in 2020. In the summer of 2022, after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Narinskaya left the country and has been living in Berlin ever since. In December 2022, her play The Last Word, Последнее Слово, about women political prisoners in today's Russia, premiered on the stage of Gorky Theater in Berlin. And the film, which Anna herself will introduce, as I understand, was being made just around
just before the full-scale invasion.
Right. So I don't need, at least not yet, introduce Ellendea Proffer Teasley, who is the protagonist of this film and who is our special guest today. Let's just please give her a very warm welcome to CUNY, and we will, after the screening, we will have a conversation between Ellendea and Anna here, so please think of your questions as we watch. Thank you, everybody, and Anna, here, please, thanks.
Yes, hello, and thank you for coming, and thank you, those of you who came from your busy New York day, and I'm really thankful for those who participated in our conference, and after this very insightful but still very kind of intense day also came here because, you know, it's documentary, it's not a thriller, so it's not absolutely, I mean, it's demands a sort of concentration in a way. I am not that nervous because I know that Ellendea and Ross already seen the film, and in a way I think, have some sort of the endorsement. But for me, it's you know, it's like, I don't know, it's like if I was Pushkin, you know, and Evgeny Onegin was in the room. So for me, it's very special thing to show this film with Ellendea here. I wanted to say several things, some of them technical. First of all, as we were talking about sponsors, I want to thank Mart Foundation, who funded the film and didn't stop working and kind of keeping us, helping us to produce when the war, the full invasion started, and everything stopped. and like people were so lost and didn't know what to do, and we kept working on this film. And we kind of understood that, of course, the fate of this film wouldn't be this brilliant fate, you know, like we thought it may be going to be on Netflix or it's going to be on very kind of big Russian streaming like Yandex. We understood already just after the start of the war that it's not going to happen. But I should say that this film is typical of that, because Mart Foundation is moved. They now kind of their office and they operate here in New York. And I heard that Sofia Karpova, the head of the foundation, going to join us after the film. But and also it's prohibited in Russia for various reasons, but mainly because I'm a foreign agent, and therefore they cannot show anything I have some relation to. You know what the concept of foreign agent in Russian, it's kind of the bad person, like smart they put on it. But, and I should now come to my co-author and like the man whose idea it was to make a film, it wasn't my idea. Because he was noble enough not to not agree on the suggestion to have my name taken from the titles in the end of the film, which would have helped to have the film streamed in Russia, and that's what's been done now in Russia really often. Like the people, you know, that there are cases when you come to a theater and you have a program and they say director, because they wouldn't mention my name, for example, of Kirill Serebrennikov or Dmitry Krymov. So, and my partner, Anton Zhelnov, didn't agree to that, and I'm very grateful. And now I should say that, as I already said, it was his idea, and if I may, want to say a couple of words why he came to me personally with this idea. The thing is that I'm a product of Tamizdat and Ardis in particular. The circumstances of my life of my family and my parents are like that in the very small study of my father, we called it study, it was like a 6 square meters room, and we had all these books, and lots of those books were you know, smuggled from abroad to Soviet Union, and we had, of course, the blue Brodsky and colorful Nabokov by Ardis in our library. And in 1983, I entered MGU, Moscow University, obviously the philological department, and at that time, it looked like that, philological department of Moscow University, 200 girls and 20 boys. And so it was competition. And all the boys were mine. Not because I was so beautiful or kind of sexy, but because I was taking these boys to my place, my parents' place, my place, and I was like kind of nonchalantly saying, you go to my father's studies. And all these people, they've seen this book, they heard about, but they didn't read or read in some sort of typewriting, kind of very pale variations, and also in the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 80s, maybe some of you know that it was the period where we had the books which were kind of copied on photographs. Not even, it was real photographs, like glossy ones. And you would have like Moskva Petushki in this pile of glossy photos. And then they would fall down and you would pick them up, and they would be in another order, because you cannot return the proper order to them. So these, my friends, were absolutely, you know, I felt so needed. I felt so exceptional because, you know, all these books were around me. And it's, of course, a very vain thing to say because, of course, more important that I read them all, I grown like them. I actually never understood that my parents would tell me, you don't tell at school or somewhere that we have those books, but still, I never understood that people around me, they cannot read so many texts because I had it in my home. So, but anyway, comes that and others, it was really part of my growing up. So it was incredibly important to me. And Anton, who came to me and said, let's do it together, for him it was very important, and for him it was, yes, very important that I'm a person so much engaged, so much actually biased in a way, loving this thing so much. It was so important for me. So, saying that, so I should say, and maybe be quicker and say that I feel lucky that I had this opportunity to work on this film, and maybe, I don't know whether now I should tell you who was doing what and how we done it, because in the mess of the beginning of the sanctions and everything, it was really difficult to work on it. But maybe we talk about it after the film. I just, again, want to thank you for coming and say one technical thing, that we have a sort of a technical problem. The thing is that the film is mostly all in English, and all the parts with English speech, we have Russian subtitles for them. But when some people speak in Russian, and there are some short abstracts of Ellendea speak in Russian, Viktor Voloshev speaks Russian, I don't know, I think Svetlana Ivanova speaks Russian, so, and they're not subtitled. So, I think we should leave with that. Yeah, so, thank you again, and see you after the film.
My one question is, I'm not, of course, suggesting that anything should have been done differently, but now that you're looking back at it 50 years back, or so on, 50 already, what are your thoughts about Ardis from today's perspective, especially, I think, in the past 2 years, and what would you have done otherwise, if anything?
I don't know that we would have done anything differently, because if there was ever an organic wave that was taking somebody, this was that case. Books would come to us, there'd be enormous mass of graphomania sent from Russia, and it would require Masha Slonim and Joseph saying, you know, that package looks interesting. And it would turn out to be Sasha Sokolov's School for Fools. So there's a lot of fate in it. What would I regret? I maybe a little bit regret, because it was my decision, not publishing Life and Fate and For the Good of the Cause. But my feeling was these were not artist books, and that somebody else would certainly do them, which they did. And for those of you who don't know Russian literature, these are major works about World War II, basically. And all of our friends said, why aren't you publishing them? And I said, because it's not our kind of literature. And they were very angry. But I don't think that I have regret about how we did it or what we did. I wish we'd had more money to do really good design in the beginning. and maybe that we didn't have to use razor blades. We all cut our fingers, cutting out the corrections, which I will not describe to you. But the one rule at Ardis was, don't get blood on the final copy. The final copy would be photographed, and if you got blood on it, we had to redo the whole page.
And because just before the film premiered today, we had a panel, a roundtable with publishers of contemporary books being banned or not, but mostly publishers outside Russia. What kind of advice would you give to this regrettable but yet another kind of way of publishing in the diaspora, publishing abroad? Especially this would be, I thought, valuable because Ardis was, of course, an American publishing house, the film made it so clear.
Well, you know, part of what saved us was that it was an American publishing house. I remember meeting a famous Czech publisher in Paris, Tigran, and he said, have you ever noticed that all the Russian emigres, whatever generation of emigres, they always end up fighting among themselves? I said, yes, I have noticed that. I think it's very hard to get Russians on one page. And I don't really have advice for people in this new, horribly difficult time, but I did say to the people that were on your stage, all of whom were very brave and doing remarkable stuff, it's the download culture now. It's the sneaking download culture now in Russia. That they had to consider what we have now, which is book lovers having their own influence on TikTok or the different things that are on the internet, and some of which are available in Russia. And they didn't seem interested in that. They didn't understand that that's something that can't be forced, that you simply send a book to someone and say, is that interesting? For example, I wrote a memoir on Brodsky, and one day, a girl on YouTube who has a show called Chitalichka, the Reader, she said, Chitalichka today is reading Ellendea Proffer's book on Brodsky. I had not sent it to her, nobody knew she was reading it, and she sold a whole bunch of books, I think. So that is happening here. We have, on Instagram, we have reader influencers who say, if you like this book, you'll like this book. And Russia has that too. And these publishers were not making use of that. I believe, like Pershing and Eisenhower, in strong alliances, but I do not think Russian publishers are known for their ability to have a strong alliance. They would be much stronger altogether. And on the internet, that's possible. And I'm just very sad that we are now back to year zero once again.
Should I let you have a conversation with Anna?
I only express an admiration. That's the only thing I can do. This film happened because Anton once interviewed you when you were presenting, actually, Brodsky среди нас, Brodsky among us, I believe, and fall in love with you, and actually doing something with you. I believe you are in his other film as well. That was his kind of, he was really fixed on the idea, and then the kind of decision was simple. Let's do a film about Ardis, and then we can have Ellendea in this film, and she's gonna be the kind of the narrative of this film. So I don't know. I mean, I'm going to ask a very not interesting question, which is because we've been thinking, and actually we've been discussing it in the conference just before the film, that do you think that technology really changes everything? Because, of course, it's a very interesting story, the Ardis story, that people would smuggle the manuscript from Russia, from Soviet Union to America, then the book, the body of the book, the object, gonna appear, and then the object again gonna be smuggled back to Russia. So it's kind of all interesting story. Do you think that the internet and the idea that you can read stuff online, even though in Russia now there's lots of sites and websites blocked, about 1 million pages blocked now in Russia. So, kind of, do you think it's still like a similar thing, or like technology really changes everything?
I have 2 words to say to you, Maria Pevchik, and the third word, предатель. Okay, for those of you who don't know, Maria Pevchik, who's one of Navalny's people, has just released on the YouTube channel, which has how many million views now? I'm at 19 million, something like this. A 3-part series about how Russia lost its country, how freedom was hijacked by oligarchs, by Yeltsin, whatever. Now, whether you agree with her or not, she has struck a nerve. The entire country is talking about this. On the internet, I mean, I read some of the Russian internet, that's all they're talking about. Whether you agree or don't agree, what about this, what about that? And that there is this level of interest, and that is, despite the blocking of the VPNs, they found ways to see it. So yes, I have to say, I'll tell you a story. A famous guy who was a famous son of a person who founded the New York Times. One time I was in conversation with him. He was a small publisher too. He said, I don't think there's anything to this internet stuff. And I said, that's what they said about radio, and it's still with us. So I do think technology matters, especially Russia and China, where you have relentless censorship, but you can have relentless innovation against censorship. How is Pevchik getting these numbers? That is my question to you.
To me, I'm not the person
Does
to answer,
know?
but I take your point. So maybe we ask,
Yes, we don't have that much time, but we do have some. If you have a question, please come to one of the microphones with the slides. Roman, and please.
Hello. Oh my God, thank you so much. This was incredible. Thank you, Anna and Carl and Ellendea. Yes, admiration doesn't even begin to describe the range of emotions that I've experienced watching the film. First, I just wanted to start with a personal comment and then ask a question. The personal comment being, when you said that the money for the down payment came from a little gig that you did for translations for Kamaz. Part of my childhood, I was in Narinskaya, which is home to Kamaz manufacturing plant, and there are no happy memories from that time. To me, the embodiment of post-Soviet Toska, and to know that that place has a direct link to Ardis is really mind-blowing.
Almost nobody knows this. We told the story a couple times, but the audience was so in shock at the concept, they didn't understand that, of course, the broaching machines were built in Detroit. The Soviet Union could not build them, and Carl's brother had the job for us.
I'm just simply stunned with that. But the question that I'd like to ask has more to do maybe with the contemporary moment, and in some ways the film is not an elegy, but maybe a celebration of Russian literature, however difficult Russian is or maybe continue to be. But in the contemporary environment, the very word Russian as a descriptor has become rather toxic. And I here speak as a Slavist myself, where really there's this move to should we still use the word Russia as a universal descriptor versus Russophone? And I've just been wondering, back in the 70s and 80s, whether this was a question that was being even asked ever. Whether it was something,
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
basically, after the Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine,
Yes.
it is not exactly a hospitable environment for Russian authors, or at any rate, authors who identify as Russian. Not least because there was this kind of separation of various backgrounds of where people come from. And I wonder if there was ever whether that was even a question in terms of asking what kind of a Russian author are you?
No, not really. Because I think you can tell from the film, some of our authors were anti-Semites. Some of our authors were very imperialistic. That isn't what interested us. What kind of writing they did was what interested us. If they were Hitler Youth apologists, obviously we were not going to do them. If they thought Stalin was a god, and we did get those manuscripts, by the way, we were not going to do them. No, I think that when we're talking about literature, a lot of bad people write good prose. I mean, if I talk to you about Tolstoy and his hatred of women, and his need for women at the same time, if I talk to you about every time Dostoevsky said Žid, if I go into Mandelstam's enthusiasm for the very vicious revolution, is that going to stop you from reading them?
Me personally, no.
Yeah. Yeah, well, as a publisher, it certainly wouldn't have stopped me from publishing them.
But if I can just maybe answer to kind of one side of your question, so to say, that in the very end of the film, there is an archive of Ellendea saying that when we were going to go to Soviet Union, everybody around us said, how can you go there? Nothing good can be there because it's a horrible Soviet, Bolshevist, whatever country. So then one can say, putting it in a modern and contemporary language, that the Soviet Union was, some people would feel it as toxic. But they decided not to listen to that. They went to Russia and look what happened.
I think here Professor Klotz has something to answer to me for. In his introduction to his book, he spends one paragraph on Ardis, and half of that paragraph is quoting Gleb Struve, who was a major figure in our field, vastly older, white Russian, very important for literature, who met us in a bar in 1969 and said, "You should not be going to Russia. Look, they've just invaded." And we said, "We are going to Russia. We are dedicated to going to Russia." And he was very angry at us. And your quote has him referring to us as impertinent.
Well, what's also remarkable in this encounter with Gleb Struve of yours on the eve of your flight to Moscow is that it was, of course, the previous, well, actually 2 generations back from the generation that you were on your way to meet in Russian folks in an outbreak such as Brodsky. So the first wave versus the very different cultural formation of the so-called third wave.
Well, 1968 it happened is what he meant. But he knew that we were already on our way, and it was not likely we were going to change our plans.
Oh, thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to say hi to Ellendea because we corresponded at the end of the 90s when Ellendea, you published my translations of Movements of Dialogue.
You have to get closer to the microphone.
You published my book of translations of Movements of Dialogue, Poem of the End, narrative poems of Movements of Dialogue, Nina. So we never met in person, so I'm glad to see you in person. We corresponded for about, mostly I corresponded with Miriam's person.
Are you a Nina Kosma?
I'm Nina Kosma.
Oh, I'm still guilty before you.
And I just wanted to say hello to you in person. And another thing I wanted to mention is that this book, after you sold the artist list, it ended up in Overlook, or in the list of Overlook books. Then Overlook, something happened to them. I think they published them.
They were bought again. They were bought again.
Right, and then the book was on Abrams' list, Abrams Publisher, and now it's with Shearsman's books. So I think the book is still alive and it's still in print. I mean, different publishing.
Yes.
And another thing I just wanted to mention, I was here reading, my parents brought me here in the early 70s, so I basically grew up reading Russian literature from Ardis books published. I started reading Ardis books in 1977, mostly Nabokov. So it's thanks to you that I was reading Nabokov.
You are very welcome. I'm still sorry about the drop page. Okay. Are there any other questions from the audience?
So, this already told everybody who was too slow to run. I had this absolutely mind-boggling feeling today during one of the panels of the conference when the new generation, so to say, of the Thomas publishers were on the screen, and I was observing you looking at them. And I'm sure that this is history happening, and I kind of rejoiced, but also I felt absolutely sad about this repetition. So the question is about repetitions. Struve was just mentioned. Were you in contact with any publishers, emigre publishers of the previous generation? And were any of these contacts productive in any way?
A lot of them were hostile to us. So, when Uskov's book came out about artists, I didn't read it, but my editors read it. And the objection was, and this is a very important objection, he never mentioned the English language part of artists, which paid for the Russian. English language were the main translations of Tsvetaeva, Mandelstam, Akhmatova's prose that Ron Meyer did, etc. The complete letters of Dostoevsky and Turgenev, and so on and so on and so on. These things were used in courses, and they were what we sold every year, and they were what gave us the money. I remember Struve and Company wondering how we could afford to do what we did, because half our publication was the English language that our country spoke and that our students would buy. So the other publishers did not do anything in English as a rule. And Nabokov, who was our friend as well as our author, it's very hard for Russian audiences to understand. I knew people much older than me when I was very young. So I knew Nabokov and I knew Nadezhda Mandelstam. And Nabokov had a lot of enemies among the publishers because he certainly did have a sense of being better than they were, better than their authors were. And there was a lot of competition. None of us could compete with YMCA Press, which published Solzhenitsyn, some very good Bulgakov. They had beautiful paper, they had wonderful typesetting, and we did wonder where they got the money, by the way, because Gulag, Archipelago, had a cost $50,000. They did so many copies, and it was such an enormous book. So there was a kind of a recognition that we were all in the same business, especially with Sinyavsky and Rozanova. There it was kind of friendly competition. But with the others, not so much. Pasiev was very political, and a lot of these people took CIA money, which we did not because we were purists, but because we knew the minute we took CIA money, our authors in Russia would be in trouble. And no one would publish with us either. But remember, in the beginning, our authors were dead authors. And there were scandalous authors, such as Kuzmin. We did a lot of Kuzmin, who was considered pornographic under both the Soviets and the current now, I would say. So I would say some were friendly, a lot were not. We did not do projects together.
My question is very straightforward, just a sheer curiosity. That Jewish writer that
Can you get close? Yeah.
The Jewish writer that thought that Jews were the source of evil was Emma Laslovsky?
I'm not answering the question.
I'm sorry, I think I volunteered myself. Thank you very much, and I just have a question because I tried to grapple with that. So a lot of times you mentioned that, the people you were dealing with, they were difficult people and they were not very likable, it seems, but they had their geniuses in the way they wrote. So how were you able to separate that? Because they were living in your home, they were around your children, but what would help you to, make you feel something good about them, because you have to like them in order to be able to publish them, right?
Well, Carl went to the Soviet Union in '62, and I went for the first time in '69, and we went every year until we were banned. We knew what they came from. We knew where that paranoia had roots. And it wasn't really paranoia. A lot of times it was correct. And it's like Brodsky, if you're so used to fighting the power, when you don't have the power to fight, it feels very peculiar. You're much more comfortable fighting the power. And we had existed in the Soviet world sufficiently. Our friends were all interrogated, and we were followed with our children. And one time, it was freezing on Krasnaya Armeyska, and there was no taxi, and these 3 little boys were there in the snow, and the KGB follower just drove up and said, "We'll take you home." So we knew their world, and their world was not a friendly world. It was not a world in which you could trust your neighbors, and it was not a world in which you could trust your publisher either. So on the one hand, sometimes it might have been nice to have gratitude. On the other hand, they were giving us their most precious thing. So that would be my answer.
Can I add something to saying that I showed this film, privately to my friend who is the major literary critic in Germany, like I would say one of the most famous, important ones. And she watched this film and she said, "My God," and she's like older than me. And she said, "My God, that the first time at last I understood why all Russian emigres are so right-wing." So, yeah.
But they weren't all, and my complaint to David Reef in this, where he says basically that I'm talking bullshit if I say I knew ones that weren't. He did not know any of the intellectuals of the science intelligentsia. The science intelligentsia was very different in our experience, and we knew some. They were, say physicists, they were able to understand that a right-wing dictatorship in South America was no better than what they had. Whereas Joseph Brodsky would say, anybody that's against the Soviets, I'm for. It was a very simple worldview. But the science people, being trained on logic, I suppose, they were quite different. So if you only knew the literary people or the artistic people, you would get one impression. But if you knew Lev Kopelev, who had learned tolerance the hard way, you would get a different impression.
But I just wanted to mention that kind of unfortunately you cannot caption a person, who his parents are. So we should say that we should have captioned David Reeve, son of Susan Sontag, which is important because he knew lots of people through his mother anyway.
So 2 more questions, and unfortunately our time will be up.
Hello, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you what your theory of editing was, whether you felt you had to give it a light touch or whether you had to really hack and slash in some of these books, and what the hardest part of that job was. And were there books that you felt if you edited them more, they would have done better, but you don't?
Well, the really hard part dealing with Soviet authors was they didn't want any editing whatsoever. They considered every word golden. So if you said, like Masha Slonim finally called up Lev Kopelev as she was working on the typesetting of either Хранить Вечно or one of the other memoirs. And Lev would do this thing like he would describe somebody's socks, how long their hair was, the shape of their nose, and this is a minor character. And she said, Lev, can I cut all of that? And he said, sure. That was very rare. Now, Sasha Sokolov did not need editing at all. Brodsky neither. But there were plenty of our writers that did, and they would lose their minds if you said, this would be better if you would leave this out. Because what they knew was Soviet censorship, and it began to feel like we were imposing that. So that was the hard part of the job.
Hi, thank you so much for everything, of course. I have a small anecdote for my question. I do work with Yasha on the Thumbs Up project, so I was, of course, aware of Ardis and your impact on Russian literature. But then last summer, I studied at the Harvard Ukrainian Summer Institute, and after class, I would go to the library and just look through every book and try to see what book was maybe thumbs up, which is, of course, thumbs up in Ukrainian. And to my surprise, I found an Ardis publication, Square of Angels, that book on Antonich. And then a few months later at Hunter, which is where we're based, I found Ardis' anthology of Soviet-Ukrainian literature from the 20s. And of course, these two were in English, so I assumed they were for American audiences. But I was curious if there were maybe other Ukrainian publications in the works that never happened, and also if Ardis ever had any relationships with publishers like Smolskip, Prolog, etc.
So we would experiment. We did a huge Eastern European anthology of poetry. We did a complete Radnoti collection, great Hungarian poet, and we did Bogdan Antonich Square of Angels. So people would send us these translations, and we couldn't really judge them all because we didn't have all these languages. But we thought these things deserve to be in English. But the problem with those books is no one would review them. We were known for Russian literature. So the minute we went outside of it, it was really hard. So no, there were not other.
Thank you.
Thank you. So just a couple of last words from dear guests, and
I just wanted to say our final thanks. First of all, to Ellendea for everything, as just been said, and for letting us, and in person it was Anton who was doing this very long interview, and I was writing the questions. But also I want to thank Yasha for the conference and for suggestion for our film to kind of to be a gala evening of the conference. And I also said about the Mart Foundation and Sofia Kapkova, who were our producers, and she's here. And I want to say thank you for not letting go when this horrible crisis started, and it's just because of her and the foundation we finished the film. And we were sitting over there, and she said, it's such a sad project, this film, because, you know, we had such a great expectation that we're going to show it everywhere, and now we only show it in occasions like that. Maybe that's true, but it's a very sad time. But me personally, I'm very happy we made this film, so thank you.
But I can tell you how some people from Ardis feel. Thank you, Anna Narinskaya. Anton Zhelnov and his crew, who we all fell in love with, they were mostly Russian, there were some Americans. They flew into country the day after Russia invaded Ukraine. And they did not know, they flew all over the country interviewing all those editors you saw. And that ranged from East Coast to West Coast to the Midwest. They did not know how they would get back, whether they would get back, and what would happen. And some of them are in country and some of them are out of Russia now. So I can say, okay, Russia probably can't see this film except with very good VPNs, but it exists. And I want to thank Mart, and I want to thank Anton, and I want to thank Narinskaya for this. It exists. Thank you.